Yourself. Recording in progress. I guess for the sake of the video, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Gloriana,
I'm
Uh,
Jessica.
and I'm Tom.
and then Jessica is going to start us off.
Yep. So the book we read was Resegregation as Curriculum, the meaning of the new racial segregation in U.S. public schools, by Kathy Kinslow. I think I'm pronouncing her name right, and then our very own Dr. Rozek, actually. Resegregation as Curriculum details the resegregation of Riverton School District over a 10-year period from 1999 to 2009. Riverton itself is I believe, a pseudonym. They made all the details of the schools in the district anonymous. So I'll refer to the the schools and district by certain names, but I think it's actually anonymous. So anyway, after the 1954 and 1955 Brown versus Board of Education decisions, the passing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and the 1968 Green versus County School Board decision, Riverton, as with other school districts across the nation, were forced to desegregate. Riverton responded by combining their all-Black high school and all-white high school into one integrated mega school called Union High, with a 50-50 Black-white student demographic. And this, just for reference, was in 1979 when it actually they fully integrated the school. So pretty late in the game, considering the Civil Rights Act was in 1964. It's kind of amazing. Anyway, so by 1999, however, Union High's demographics had shifted dramatically, with an enrollment of 70% Black students and 30% white. To reverse the trend of white flight, Riverton School District sought to overturn the federal desegregation order and was, thanks to a conservative-minded 1992 Freeman versus Pitts decision, successful in this pursuit. Overturning the federal desegregation order was not in and of itself a bad thing. It doesn't sound great, right? Like, desegregation is good. We don't want our schools to be segregated. That's bad. But they could have used the newfound legal liberty, that is, to rezone the district in a way that created a more even demographic, keeping the same mega school structure with all students from the district going to one high school. Unfortunately, Riverton did not do this. Instead, Riverton decided to divide Union High students between three newly built high schools. And those are called Northbrook, Garner, and then a newly constructed Union High. Issues with this plan were evident from the very beginning. While Garner had a relatively mixed demographic, the students assigned to Northbrook were mostly white, and the students assigned to the new Union High were almost all Black. 20 years after the initial federal desegregation order, Riverton had once again segregated its district. To make matters worse, there was a 3-year delay in building the new Union High. So while students at Northbrook and Garner enjoyed freshly constructed classrooms from the get-go, the Black students assigned to the new Union High were relegated to some of the oldest facilities in the district on the west side of town. Construction of the new Union High was slated for the grounds of an old high school used for Black students in the de jure racial segregation era, which, rightly so, drew much backlash. Riverton denied any purposeful intention behind the segregated nature of their district restructuring, but the inherent racism behind their actions is obvious to us as readers and to you as audience members, and certainly to the students at Union High themselves. For reference, so the students assigned to the new Union High, because they were relegated to these older facilities on in the district. I'll refer to them in the rest of this kind of summary as like West Side students, or I'll refer to it as a West Side location, because there wasn't, I don't believe, an official name for the school. It was just the students that were intended to go to the new Union High, and they were on the west side of campus temporarily. So anyway, so it's the students, unsurprisingly, who took the full impact of the district's restructuring. Shocker. Having to attend classes in some of the district's oldest facilities was incredibly stigmatizing. The buildings themselves were in poor shape, and because the district wanted to preserve funds for the construction of the new high schools, a few material resources were invested into the Black students' education during the 3-year construction delay. West Side students had to use older equipment, outdated technologies, and tattered uniforms. There's actually an example in text where I believe it was a soccer team at the West Side location. They were competing with another school outside the district, and they had to ask to use their, I believe their white jerseys, so their what would have been their home jerseys, I believe, because the other jerseys that they had for competing against other schools were in such bad condition. So that kind of shows you, how bad things were. And whereas students at Garner and Northbrook had all new uniforms, all new technology, all just like totally remodeled facilities. So it's very, very unfortunate and equal, obviously. So given the lack of material resources and West Side's inconvenient location, a few teachers wanted to work there and place requests to be assigned to Northbrook or Garner instead. Union High's once flourishing IB program declined as white students refused to enroll at the West Side location. Kind of for some quick context about IB. So IB programs can only be set up or they can only stay at the school they've been set up at originally. So if a school or if a district restructures and it has more schools, they can't move the IB program around. And so what happened is that the white students refused to go to the West Side High School, and so the IB program diminished in attendance, and they weren't able to support the program as a whole with the smaller attendance or smaller enrollment that they had at West Side. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, in some, it created a lot less opportunities for the students at West Side and much less class offerings, especially for advanced students. So it was very, very sad. And unfortunately, Riverton also invited a lot of the West Side students to transfer to Northbrook or Garner if they were performing above average academically or athletically. So this further stigmatized West Side School as a whole and created a wrongful association of West Side with poor school performance overall. Riverton really in some, and the main takeaway from this is that the school district just took all their resources and put it to Northbrook or Garner and neglected the students at West Side. Unfortunately, tying in with this, there was a lot of bias in media and just poor coverage of the school as a whole. There's, glorification of Northbrook and Garner, but West Side just was neglected entirely. It would be easy to assume from this that Black students' morale suffered during this time, and this is not an incorrect assumption, but it would be wrong to assume that Black students internalized this poor morale. Interviews of the students included in the book are incredibly enlightening. Not only did West Side students predict many of the district's decisions, they analyzed the reality of their situation with incredible clarity. Some levels of cynicism and hopelessness in the interviews are evident, but it is clear that West Side students retained an externalized, rebellious perspective, refusing to let the district's racist decisions affect them on a deeper level. Students engaged in social activism, protesting the decision of the district. And though these protests had limited effect, the message was clear. Students were not passive entities in Riverton School District's segregationist plans. As the book makes clear, Riverton was not alone in resegregating its school district. Riverton represents a small sample microcosm by which to assess a nationwide trend. The study and thus the book demonstrates two particularly important points. First, that historically, schools were and have been segregated longer than they were ever integrated. And second, that the resegregation of schools poses a hidden curriculum with incredibly negative, lasting, and compounding effects on students, in particular on students that are Black. Reading the book, it's hard to believe that such injustices against Black students were allowed to happen, but they did, and similar injustices are still being enacted against students of color across the US today. I'm going to finish this brief summary by paraphrasing a brief concluding passage from the book. So through the resegregation of schools, students, Kinslow and Rosek write, are watching us acquiesce to the return of this social evil. They interpret our actions and inactions and learn things from them, whether we intended for them to do so or not. They learn that some students are less valued, considered less worthy of investment, are assumed to be more violent, and are assumed to be less educable. They learn that these designations are largely resistant to their efforts to refute them. They learn that fairness and racial justice in schools are an unreasonable expectation, and that civil rights era advances in racial equality and justice were historical aberrations. This is what the hidden curriculum of resegregation communicates to students. By any reasonable standard, we should not be teaching such things to our children. And that's the end of my summary here. I hope it was thorough.
Perfect. And then I think, Tom, you had our first section about major themes, and then I'll take it back from you after that.
Yeah, we're going to expand a little bit on the historical context of the desegregation and then the resegregation of this district. So we're all pretty familiar with Brown v. Board, 1954, made it necessary for schools to desegregate by federal order of courts. And so there were a lot of school districts who took advantage of some vagueness in that decision. And so the Green decision was a 1968 case in Virginia where the courts ruled that this Virginia district had been taking advantage of that vagueness and had this still by default segregation in their district. So what the court did then was to apply some stricter standards on what was necessary for districts to get control of their own zoning back again. And so they have to demonstrate that students are assigned in a non-discriminatory manner, which the courts generally meant by this was that there's no predominantly one race schools, and the zoning is race neutral, and then proportion of majority minority faculty and staff are proportional to the community itself. Extracurricular activities are made available on a non-discriminatory basis. Facilities, transportation, and resources are provided without regard to race. And so then the 92 decision, Freeman versus Pitts, changed the standard of the unitary status from one in which there were no racially identifiable schools to one in which they could demonstrate that racial segregation is not being enforced by the district. So if the district is not enforcing racial segregation, or if they can't demonstrate that they are, then they can have their order lifted and control goes back to the district. And so this decision really enabled the Riverton district, which is it's sort of like a pen name they give to Tuscaloosa schools in this book, the ability to get control back over their board, to which they immediately, when we go back to the standards of the Green decision, they immediately like start reversing all of those things, right? They make a racially identifiable school. The extracurricular activities are not made available on a non-discriminatory basis for various reasons, not the least of which is their just material resources and cost barriers. The facilities are not like equal. Yeah, and so they petitioned to get this desegregation order lifted. And when they go to rezone the schools, there's this argument over a thing called a tipping point, which is attributed to a 1958 study by Morton Grodsons. So he said that after a community exceeded a limit of non-white portion of population, the whites would be compelled to either move neighborhoods or enroll their children in private schools where there were more white people. There's like some obvious problems with this, but some of them are that it assumes this sort of like uniform, racist, white, like limit to how many non-white people they will tolerate sharing their community with them, which is just, there is no uniform uniform standard of that across the board. But there is, there is some reason to fear this tipping point because the surrounding cities had issues similarly to this, where there were well-off and white families and neighborhoods who wanted to, they saw too many Black kids at their kids' schools, and they started moving neighborhoods. They started enrolling their children in private schools. And so the people in Tuscaloosa saw this happening, and so it's kind of a compelling argument for them that they're worried that the tax base for their schools are going to be lessened if that white flight happens, and that the quality of schools overall will decline. And so that is a large part of what got buy-in from the rest of the community to move forward with this this rezoning, which then ended up by de facto just making an all-Black school. They didn't do this completely on just the support of the white part of the community, though. They got civil rights leaders and Black community leaders to also lend their support to lifting the desegregation order by promising like investment in facilities and infrastructure. And then also like these leaders in the Black community had a certain kind of resignation about that this is going to move forward regardless. And so if we can like get these concessions now, it's better to take them and give our support for it. And so they there are parts of the Black community who also like acquiesced to this change. Yeah, and so they got enough support for it, and they lifted the desegregation order, and then they immediately rezoned the district so that they had a majority white school, a 50-50 Black and white school, and then like a basically 100% Black school. I think they said they had one white student the first year of this school. Yeah,
First
exactly.
two.
Oh, two?
Yeah.
Out of 800?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ready for me to take over?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So first we had this kind of historical context, which is one of the major themes, and then kind of the other major theme of the book, and really kind of the whole argument of this book is basically that regardless of whatever school district said and its rationale for why they resegregated these schools or whatever the reasons were, they talked a lot about smaller classroom sizes, which is one of the reasons they wanted to separate the schools, and they wanted schools to be closer to their communities, none of which actually were true in the end when all three of these schools were built. Regardless of those reasons, students, teachers, faculty, community members, they all kind of, because of all the different compounding circumstances that were happening, and Jessica went over a lot of those, and I will touch on a lot of those again, it basically acted as this hidden curriculum that to me seems like they focused on two main things. It basically taught students, one, that there was a racial hierarchy with Black people at the bottom, and that they could essentially, that they weren't worth as much effort as their white students or as much investment into their education as white students. And then two, one of the major things they focus on is that a lot of these students ended up like losing trust in the adults in their life. So a lot of the times they do a lot of interviews with students, and one of the things a lot of the students reference a lot is like there's a bigger system that should be catching these things, and they're trying to like impose kind of like this hope that some adult in their life, some system in their life is going to catch this before it becomes like true deep segregation, but it doesn't end up happening. And then all of these students are like, why did this happen to us, essentially? And they kind of lose faith in themselves as students and also in their communities at large. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can figure out how. And it's not going to let me. Oh, wait, there it is. Sorry. And ignore that for a second. You don't see that. Okay, you see this though. um, Basically, these are kind of the ones that they talk about the most in terms of features of the new Union High School, which is the almost 100% Black school. I'm not going to go over all of them. We've talked a little bit about the demographic. The school ended up being 100% Black with one student in attendance who was white, and then eventually that student transferred out after 2 years. Jessica went over the facilities really well, so I'm not really going to touch on that, as well as the equipment. The IB program as well was one that they focused on a lot, just because there was so much public discourse happening amongst like the district and parents of students that were that parents of the students in the IB programs, and they were essentially saying, I'm not going to enroll my students into this Black high school because I think that it has a bad reputation, and the facilities were reflecting that, and their instruction was kind of informing that perception, as well as just good old racism was informing that decision. And so, yeah, it led to the heavy decline of the IB program because all of these students were essentially being bused to the white school. And the book talks about how, in theory, the presence of the IB program in the Union High School could have been a really positive thing, but due to tracking in the middle school, a lot of the predominantly Black middle schools were not, they were discouraging their students from participating in the IB program, which led to the really low rates of participation as well. And then all the IB programs, all the IB honors programs, and all of the AP programs all got pushed into one class. And then the whole higher academic system of the school ended up declining, which furthered students' perceptions of their worth and their academic abilities. And then a lot of the book also talked about student discourses as they were happening amongst students within their schools and then students across schools, especially in those first couple years, because so many people, they had all gone to the same original high school and then were resegregated. And how students in Northbrook and Garner kind of perpetuated this discourse of superiority due to their better facilities mostly, and also their status as a white school, and how it kind of, again, perpetuates this feeling of inferiority that then compounds on top of all these other things and creates a school environment that students don't want to be a part of. Teachers also, as Jessica said, they were asking and petitioning to be placed in Garner and the other one, the two predominantly white schools, even before the split happened, before there was any real evidence of what these schools would look like, because they understood at that time that this resegregation process was going to end up with certain schools, white predominant schools, as having better facilities. And then one thing they also touched about was parent involvement in PTA, which talks about how historically schools that are desegregated, unfortunately, one of the side effects of that can be the push out of Black and POC parents from participating in PTAs and in favor of white participation from white parents. And then when the resegregation happened, all of these parents essentially didn't have like, they didn't, it's like when if you went to college and you're a first generation and you don't know how to navigate college, it's like kind of the same thing. It's like all these people don't know how to navigate PTA, they don't have a history in the PTA, so parent involvement tanks in those schools, while parent involvement in the other schools remains really high, which contributes to funding, which contributes to all of these other things, the materials and the equipment and the facilities. So yeah. And then do we want to move on to the next part? Let me stop sharing my screen, if I know how. Did it. And then I think, Tom, we were going to talk about curriculum.
Yeah, connections to curriculum theories. So you mentioned Anion and hidden curriculum already. That's very upfront in the book. I have a very quick example from a reading on Banks's Tiers of Integrating Curriculum, which talks about this classroom of Lindsay Schlack's. It's a tiered system that sort of like shows to what extent you're involving minority subjects in your curriculum. And tiers 3 and 4 are transformation and then to social action. And so there's an example from this history class at Garner where a teacher, while they were teaching the civil rights era, they decided to focus on the experience of the young people who were involved in those actions and focus on stories involved in the civil rights struggle that actually took place within the city where these kids are in Alabama, because this was one of the sites of the civil rights struggle of the 50s. And so the lessons involved all of that. And then there was a project where they were to go out and find elder community members they could talk to who were alive during that time, who were either involved in it or not. And then just do some interviews with them, get their perspective on why or why not they were involved in the direct action during that. And there was a reflection by one of these students in this class that showed, what page is this? Page 131. She's talking about how they're learning about Brown v. Board here. All right. And they learn about it as if it's just something that happened in the past, but after doing that lesson, they realize that that's not really something that ended. It's not like this. History is not these like discrete events that then happen and then this is here now. They live on in the present. And so the student closed their reflection with, where is it? Here we go. We always talk about civil rights as if it's in the past, it's something you visit in the museum or the historical sites. You feel like it is history, but now I realize civil rights has never really ended. What we heard today is a lot like what people have been talking about in Riverton the last year. Brown is alive, Brown is here. So they made this connection between, the Brown v. Board decision and what was happening. And then that did lead to some social action with the students later on. They ended up organizing a walkout. They got a Get Out the Vote campaign where they registered like 70 18-year-old students to vote in the school board elections. So yeah, that history curriculum became a drive to social action and was transformational. Yeah.
I think for some reason our meeting is going to close in 1 minute and 20 seconds. I don't know
Okay.
why that is.
I am also seeing this like runtime. Yeah.
Does anyone know why this is happening with
don't.
Zoom? I haven't been
It
on Zoom
does
in
that
so long.
if you use your personal account, and if you use your school account, then it gives you like however much time. But if it's not
Okay.
your school account, then
Okay.
it'll limit you to like 30 minutes or 45 or something.
That's
Okay.
silly.
Yeah.
How do we want to do this?
You could always edit it and just put the other part together. And
Okay.
just put a new call.
Yeah,
Okay,
do we
I'm
want to call
gonna-
back in for 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm gonna pause this right here, and then we just have like a really short, like less than 10-minute section left, and then I'll just start a new meeting and I'll send it to you guys really quick. So sorry.
All good.
Okay.